There you are now. Welcome back to the workshop. So in today's episode, it's the second day of stripping this Cooper S. We had a very interesting feedback, and I'm delighted that you all enjoyed the last video stripping this S. A couple of questions came up. One was about the idea of liner in this engine block. So I very definitely made mention to the fact that we could put a liner in this engine block, and a few people were wondering whether that would actually be possible or not. So I've talked to a few people about this that would be in the know. Obviously, because the engine isn't fully stripped yet, I haven't actually gone to my machine shop and talked to my machine shop man, but I have been talking to a couple of people that are in the know and have worked with these motors before. And I'm assured there is really two options. One is to use what's called a spun cast iron liner, and it is a full depth liner, a bit like the original factory liners. So it doesn't sit on a lip inside the block. It actually is, the bore of the block is smaller than the liner. The liner is dipped in liquid nitrogen, which causes the liner to shrink. It's dropped into the block and then it expands. They skim the top of the block and they bore the liner to size. That's one possibility. And that could be done at 73.5. Well, it'd go to 73.55 or something like that. There'd be a clean-up bore done just to clean the bores up and square them. And then the liner would go in, and so it might be 74 or something like that. The second option we have is to stay at 73.5. We could build this engine 73.5. And I suppose the third option is we can bore the blocks with a step in it at 74.4. which is the sort of the next one, which gives a 1 mil, which is a ½ mil lip all the way around, which I'm assured actually is more than enough to hold the liner. And the way that works is that the machine bores down to just before the very end of the block. The liner goes down to that, and the top of the liner is skimmed, and that kind of traps the liner between the cylinder head and the bottom of the block. The thing about this engine is it is going to be a road engine. It's going to be used for low mileage in a restored Cooper S that's not going to see any huge work. If this was being built as a race engine, then I wouldn't even consider the liner option, because with a bore this big, that would be off the cards. But because this is going to be a road going engine that's going to do very little miles, you know, in its lifetime, if it sees 50,000 miles, that'll be a miracle. Linering it is very definitely an option. So today's job is going to be, let's get the rest of this motor pulled back down. Let's get the crank out and get it measured, because we want to see what size we're on the crank. Let's just check the conrods as well to see what shape they are in and what size the conrod pins are, and get the rest of the ancillaries off the block so it's ready to go off to the machine shop on Monday, and myself and the machinist can make a decision as to what the best course of action will be for this. I also need to make a decision as to what the course of action for the crankshaft is, and also the rods. The customer that dropped me this also has another set of S rods, which is brilliant, because we now have sort of, I actually think he's a set and a half. So I think we have like 11 conrods, which will be brilliant. It means that I can show you in a video in the future how we can get a matched pair of rods. So a lovely thing to be able to do if you've got a really good selection of rods is, before you do any modification to the rod, is to play around with all the different rods you have. So let's say you have 12 rods and you need 4 out of it. You play around with all the different rods and you get a set of rods that are really close to the same weight, little end and big end and overall. And then you can modify those rods and you get a much more accurate finish to the whole thing, and you get a better setup. So that's a video that's going to come down the road, because I know there's a good few people that are interested in seeing conrod modification, so I can do a video on that coming down the road. And this is literally the best with these S rods. It'll be the best application for me to show that. Other stuff that is going to come from it, we'll look at stuff like shim and drop gears and many other parts of this S build. With that said, I'm going to take this S build. I was trying to figure out what way this was going to go, and I've finally decided now. I'm going to take this S build completely through on the channel. So this is going to be part 2 in building the Cooper S engine, which is obviously still stripping. We're not actually going to be building it, but I'm actually going to take it the whole way through, all the way to getting this engine actually running running here in the workshop. So this will happen over the next couple of weeks, month or two, as we go through each stage of building this engine, speccing it, finding the best components, putting the engine, you know, through the machine shop, bringing it back here, doing my modifications to the block that I want to do, getting the block painted, getting the short motor built, getting the long motor built, getting the gearbox built, and actually getting this engine started. We even have the carburetors that are going to be used, the inlet manifold that's going to be used. So we can literally do everything to get this engine running before it goes back to the customer. So that's going to be a build series over the next few weeks. We'll get into this one now and get the ancillary stripped off this. And for a new game here on the HRE YouTube channel, I want you to re-watch the last couple of minutes of footage, and I want you to take a drink every time I say the word rods. If you can still manage to hit the play button after it, come back and follow the rest of this video. Okay, so the next part in stripping this motor down is the timing side. I've taken the pulley off, and next is this cover. As you guys are aware, I always like to do all of this by hand every time I strip an engine, and the idea behind that is because I want to get an idea and feel for the person who was here before me. Obviously, if it was an engine I built, it would be a different story, but this is an engine that I've never seen before and somebody else built it. We know it's a modified engine because we've seen from the way it's bored, from the camshaft, that sort of thing, that it isn't an original engine, it has been modified. Straight away, I'm seeing interesting, I suppose, artifacts. One, it's nice to see that a good quality timing gear has been used. I think this is the original Piper timing, vernier adjustable timing gear that was made for MED. So it's a reasonably old kit, but very good quality, and always worked really very well. No timing chain adjuster, and we can see we've quite a lot of slack in that timing chain. That can easily be 2 or 3 degrees there in cam timing. Now, here's the thing. You'll have seen me build race motors before and not fit a timing chain tensioner. In fact, somebody commented recently on a duplex timing chain, or a simplex timing chain kit from SwiftTune, where I didn't use a timing chain adjuster. But those kits are made very specifically, and the chain is incredibly tight fit. And also, I change that chain every 20 hours, and sometimes much more often than that. So in a situation where I know the timing chain is going to get changed every 20 hours, I'll do away with the timing chain adjuster, because in a very high spec race motor, the friction that the timing chain adjuster causes is a small amount of horsepower taken. It's probably fractions of a horsepower, but when you build a race engine, you're looking for every fraction you can get. In an engine like this, where I know for a fact this isn't an all-out race engine, a timing chain adjuster would have made a lot of sense, because it's going to do a lot more mileage and it would keep that whole thing in check. Another interesting artifact here is that somebody has put the throw-out oil ring on. That's good, but they put it on upside down. And the way this actually should be is this way. And you can clearly see that there's a step in that throw-out ring, and that step is to allow this to go down and sit beside the chain, to keep in close and tight to the chain. So by putting that on that way, what happens is that you put the throw-out ring up against the seal, and you can actually damage the seal. So the idea here is that with it that way around, the oil will be thrown back down away from the seal. In this way, I suppose it still will keep the oil off the seal, but it's just not the right way around. Next to come off is going to be this this pulley. Now we get to have a look and see what this camshaft looks like. As I said, we're not going to reuse this camshaft in this engine build because we're building an S road car engine. But I always like to see the camshaft and, you know, get an understanding for what we might be dealing with. Let's get the push rods to get out of the way. Now, you do have to be very careful when you're removing a camshaft from an engine that you imagine you're going to reuse the cam bearings in, because the lobes coming out can catch the cam bearings and can damage them. So it's a good idea, if you think you're going to reuse a camshaft or think you're going to be reusing these bearings, to be very careful and to withdraw that cam in such a manner that it stays concentric all the way out. This one we know 100% will be getting new cam bearings, so it's not as big a problem. So let's get this cam into the light and have a look and see what we have. Almost instantaneously, we're starting to see the effects of high mileage on this cam. But believe it or not, these old cams were hardy. People don't believe, you know, there's this notion, it was all made out of better stuff back in the day. But my experience has been such that these old camshafts, they wore really, really very well and were made of a really good material. I think they were well ground and made of a hard material. And I think cam followers generally were of better quality then too. So looking at this cam, what are we looking for? We're looking for a couple of things. We want to check the over the nose profile here, and we're checking for flattening. Now this cam has it, and it is why I said to you it's showing signs of wear. Hopefully the camera will pick this up. So the very top of the profile of the cam actually is gone flat. So rather than having a really nice smooth transition like this profile here has, where it's lovely and smooth over the nose, this one has a flat spot over the nose. There's actually a flatness here. And that's where the cam is transitioning from full lift to letting it back down to close again. Well, actually the other way. We are going to look at the follower. So this will be follower number 1 here. We're going to look at follower number 1, and I'll be amazed if I don't see that follower having loads of pitting and pop marks in it. Looking here at the next one on, this one is also the same. It has that flat spot just over the nose. Looking at the heel of the cam, we can see very little wear. So the heel of the cam can tell you what the surface finish would have been, because this is where you've got your tappet clearance. So technically speaking, the follower is not touching here at all. There's a complete gap between the follower and the cam. So we can see what we should expect to see, and then this is where the maximum wear will be on the cam. And we can clearly see on these two lobes that we have this sort of pickup and pitting. What causes this? In my experience, 99.9% of cam wear is caused by really two things. It's caused by the initial break-in of the engine, and that is the running in procedure. And second of all, on these real high lift cams like this, lots of idling. Idling these engines is really hard on the cam. They don't like it. The reason why is when you idle them, the cam swiping over the lifter wipes the oil and it breaks the oil film, meaning that you get the cam and lifter coming in contact. When you get engine speed up and everything starts to happen a little bit quicker, the oil film is building up stronger on the actual camshaft itself, and you're getting that speed where the oil maintains over that high speed transition, where the top of the lobe comes over the cam. When you idle over these big lift cams with really heavy valve springs, everyone says that the problem is actually heavy valve springs, and I do agree, heavy valve springs do contribute to valve wear, but predominantly cold starting a new engine and leaving it tick over, wiping the oil film off the cam, and what inevitably happens is you get transfer of material from the cam to the cam follower, and that transferred material will forevermore wipe the oil off in that position, because you can't get a smooth oil film because the surface finish is broken. And that smooth oil film, once it's gone, you now get massive wear. And I've seen engines with as little as 10 or 15 hours which have destroyed camshafts. And the reason for this is because the running in procedure of the engine was poor. People ask me about putting on compounds on the cam or using different oils or stuff like that. Honestly, the best thing you can do if you have anything other than a standard cam, and even with a standard cam this is a good thing to do, when you first build a motor and you know everything is right because you've checked all your tolerances and you've got oil pressure in that motor by pre-pressurizing the system, pre-filling it, cranking it on the starter motor, when you're going to fire that motor, do not let it go below sort of 1500, 2000 revs. I like 2000 plus, until that engine has warmed right up. Now you've got to be on the ball with your ignition timing. You've got to be on your ball with fueling. You don't want the thing running too rich. In a video I shot a while ago, which was starting a Cooper S, a subscriber commented, "Never rev a cold engine." Now, I'm not one to have a go at subscribers, and I don't want to be the person who goes down at a subscriber, but it is that very ethos that destroys camshafts. It will wreck a camshaft in an instant. This notion that revving a cold engine will break it somehow. The only problem with bringing the revs up on a cold engine is if that engine does not have an oil film. If you pre-pressurize your engine with oil, the oil film is there. The instant that motor starts, the pump will make oil pressure and everything will float on its oil film. So this notion that revving a cold engine wrecks it, that's rubbish. Because let me tell you this, a cold engine is the loosest it will ever be. Because when everything gets hot, everything expands. So which expands quicker, the piston or the bore? Obviously the piston. It's aluminium, it'll heat quicker, it expands quicker. So it's going to be tighter in the bore when the engine gets hot. So cold, it's not going to damage itself. This notion that, oh, you'll seize the piston in the bore because you're revving a cold engine. Not going to happen. It's simple physics, guys, and it's the unfortunate lack of knowledge of some people with simple physics that can lead to this false dawn of information that people on the grapevine, never rev a cold engine, don't rev a cold engine. Some fella said don't rev a cold engine. Why? I don't know, but if you rev a cold engine, it'll wreck it. And then everyone starts to believe that. And they build a brand new race engine and they let it tick over for 25 minutes. And it ticks over for 25 minutes and it wipes the lobe off the cam. All right? I've had the greatest of privilege to have been in and under the guises of some really top race engine builders over the years, and I've had the ear of these. And across the board, I don't know any good top race engine builder who would start a motor and let it tick over. They just don't do it. Absolutely don't do it. Anyway, with that little rant out of the way, let's get on to the next step. And the next step on this is going to be dropping out some of these pistons. I will look at the cam followers in a while. They're sitting in order 1 to 8. I'm going to just leave them there. We'll pop them out in a while and we will have a look at them. Next thing I want to do is get these pistons out. Okie dokie. So we have our last rod out. So we're starting to see signs of why it is this engine was suffering low oil pressure. So if we start looking at these bearing caps, we can see very definitely there's been huge wear on these big ends. Now that wear that's showing here, that copper wear that we're seeing here, is indicative of ingress of foreign matter, okay? Because we can see that the muck and dirt has come from the oil hole in the crankshaft and has been dragged across the bearing. Yeah, it's been dragged right around it. So this is very typical and indicative of ingress of dirt. This greying that you see here in the white metal bearing, see this kind of dark grey or graphite black color that you're seeing in the bearing here, that's actually just indicative of the bearing doing its job. That is exactly why we put white metal bearings in engines. White metal is softer than the material the crankshaft is made out of, so that if there is debris in the oil film, it will be sucked into the white metal of the bearing and contained, and won't break the oil film and won't act as an abrasive on the pin of the crankshaft. And that's the very reason why we actually use white metal bearings, because that allows us to maintain an oil film at all times around the pin of the crank and stop us getting wear. So we're seeing two things. We're seeing the bearing doing its job and working, so it's got a lot of miles on the clock, but we're also seeing this oil film being broke down by a massive ingress of dirt and material, which has been damaging it. Having a look at the piston assembly, the pin feels good. There's no appreciable wear in the piston. The piston itself, I haven't got my feeler blades out yet, but I am seeing a very large amount of movement in the oil and in the ring and the ring land. So if I put the ring in where it should be, I don't know if the camera is going to pick this up really well, but I can clearly see that this ring is moving up and down inside the ring land, which is what I would expect. I'm seeing this kind of blackening which is moving down the piston, which is just wear, okay? And these are a kind of a cast piston. They're AE, they're originally AE pistons. So AE van der Waal now, or AE pistons is what they would have been. they're not a race item really. You can see by this piston it's heavy, it's got a big shroud, it's got a big heavy crown on it, and there's a lot of weight in them. So they're not a race item, and they were being used in what is obviously a very high performance engine. So seeing the wear that we see here is exactly conducive to what I'd expect. The pistons have seen their day. They've done what would be expected of them, but they are done now and they are worn. The rods themselves, they look in pretty good condition. I'm not seeing any overheating around the pin bosses, which is good, meaning that these more than likely will be serviceable. One of the things that I noticed and was very happy with, on every single rod, the cap slid easily off the bolts. So just to give you that, I'm just doing it on one there, but they all did that, sliding easily on the rod bolts. That's a good sign. What that means is it's unlikely that the cap has gotten badly distorted. If you feel a cap very stiff to come apart there on the bolts, you know, as you slide that off, it takes, you know, you have to bang the bolt out or you have to pull it really hard. What that's telling you is more than likely, rather than having a nice smooth circle in the end of the rod, you've got that kind of ovulation going on, and it pushes out the rod bolts, which makes them tight coming out of the end of the cap. And it's certainly one of the things I would always look for if I was trying to pick a set of rods for an engine. If I was trying to pick 4 good rods for an engine, one of the things I'd want to feel is really smooth action of the cap on and off the rod bolts. I'd want to feel them freely moving on and freely moving off. And that would tell me that I know that that cap is in good shape. Obviously, the next step will be to measure all of those caps with a dial bore gauge, so that we can see if there's any ovulation in it. And we will do those measurements when we pick a set of rods for this engine. We'll go through all the rods that we have. Are we still playing the drinking game? These are locked at this stage, I'd say. We'll go through the sets of rods we have with the dial bore gauge, and we'll pick 4 out. And that will be part of a video. We'll do a modifying rods or picking our rods video specifically on it, which will be a few minutes of it. Last job to do now is to get this crankshaft out. And that'll leave us back to square one again, where we started with our other Cooper S block in the last video. So I'm not going to bore you with the details of cracking off these rod bolts. I'll just get the crankshaft out and we'll have a look at that. Well, we have loads more reason for seeing our low oil pressure stat on this engine. So if we have a look at the center main bearings, we can see that these are completely toast, absolutely completely toasted. All of the white metal is gone, completely full of that coppering. So let's have a look and see, are they oversized? So the bearings are oversized, they're on plus 20. Now I have plus 30 tau bearings that will suit this crank, but I'm not sure it's going to clean up on a plus 30. It might, but there is a lot of wear there. I can get plus 40s for it as well, so it might have to go on to a 40 thousandths overgrind to clean that up. While we're there, let's have a look and see what size bearings were on the big ends. So the big ends are interesting. They could well be on standard, actually. That would be great. If the big ends are on standard, that would be great. That means the only thing we're worried about, yep, big ends are on standard, so that's great. So big end bearings are on standard. We'll measure those pins up. More than likely they're going to need a grind because we are seeing that coppering coming up, and I can feel a very noticeable ridge there on my thumb on a couple of those bearing surfaces. So yeah, I can see this crank is going to need a grind. Good news, thrust surfaces are looking really, really good. No appreciable wear on the thrust surfaces there. So they will remain good as standard, which is really good because Cooper S cranks have a different width main bearing. So it's nice that we're not going to get caught out there. And I have S thrusts in that size, so in standard size, which these guys are. They're not oversized thrusts. Yeah, they're on standard, which is exactly what we want. So that's good news. Looking at this, we have a much more serviceable engine than that last one we stripped. that we were going to potentially use on this job. We can see we're not suffering those cracks that we were seeing in that last engine. Interesting to note here, the person that built this last used Loctite on the threads of these studs, which is a complete and utter no-no. I'm very interested as to why they might have done that. Doesn't really make any sense. Secondly, obviously this being a Cooper S, the stud is what actually locates the cap, rather than on the later engines where the stud would have been, the cap would be located on a dowel and then you would have a bolt that goes through it. So the studs for S's are a little bit unusual. They're very important because this dimension here is actually what locates the cap, is what keeps the cap on center. Now, more than likely I will modify this and I'll put it on dowels. I'll actually drill and modify all of these to put these caps on dowels and then line hone the block on those new dowels to make sure that all my caps are on center and where they should be, because I'll use the much later ARP fasteners to hold down the studs rather than these older style S fasteners. Now in fairness, I say older style S fasteners, these are actually really good, and there's a nut you can get from ARP for these which is top class. It works really, really well, but I'll more than likely upgrade this block and use the MED fastener kit, because I've been using them for the last couple of years and they're just uber reliable and work really, really well. I love the way they work in the block. And I love the way they hold the caps down. So more than likely what I'm going to do. Amazingly, the bores actually feel pretty good. There is wear in them. There's definitely wear in the bore, but no major scoring or scratching, which is great. And I'm pretty confident that myself and the machinist are going to be able to come up with a solution for this that is going to allow us to get this engine back to a standard bore. So I'll keep you updated on that as we progress through this engine build. So this will go to the machine shop on Monday, and more than likely then in the next week or two you'll start seeing some progression with this engine. We'll start getting a set of rods for it. I just wanted to make you drink one more time. We will get the crankshaft off to be ground. We'll get this block off the machine shop to get its liners fitted. We're going to pick some pistons out for it. More than likely we'll go standard or plus 20 tau. More than likely standard. I'd love to try and keep this engine dead standard. Maybe the cast Omegas from somebody like MED again is what we'll more than likely go with this. They're really lovely piston, work really well, uber reliable. As I said, haven't decided a camshaft yet, but I'll chat to the customer on it. Gearbox wise, more than likely going to go with the 4 synchro box that the customer dropped us up, because I think that will work really well. So I'm actually starting to get really excited about this engine build. You can probably see it now. I'm looking forward to getting cracking on this and getting it started. It's going to be a bit of fun. Next up in the video train, the next engine video you're going to see is us putting together the short motor for the red roofed race car. If you haven't seen the red roof race car, I'm going to put a link to the HRE Uncut where we talked about it, and you can go there and see where we're at. So that is going to come on a pace now over the next couple of weeks. This will be off in the machine shop getting its bits and pieces sorted out, and as soon as that comes back to us, we'll start doing a build on this. Thank you very much to everybody who is new to the channel for clicking on the thumbnail and watching our video. I hope you liked it and enjoyed it. If you did, maybe have a look around at some of our other videos, and if you liked them, maybe think about giving us a subscribe. We really, really do appreciate everybody here on this channel, and I really do appreciate everybody in the community. Don't forget, if you have been watching this video and you're a long-term subscriber to the channel, to like the video and comment. As you have seen probably from some of my other videos, I always like to try and answer the comments and give you guys as much feedback as I can, and I really do enjoy your feedback too. Other than that, there's nothing more for me to say, but see you guys on the next one.